Hello and welcome to Scratch Lesson 2. If you remember last time we made a simple Pong game, we learned about movement and how to make things move both on the X and Y plane and moving forward in the direction of the object. We also learned about collisions, so what to do when two objects collide, and we did some choices based on some if commands. So if commands take a condition, such as if touching sprite 1, then turn 90 degrees or turn 180 degrees. And we also learned about a forever control, which tells things to keep repeating as long as the program is running. And lastly, we learned about events, which tell us when to start and stop something. Today, we're going to learn a little bit more. We're going to learn about using variables. We're going to learn about detecting direction to make it bounce correctly. And we are going to set the paddles in the ball to start the same for every game. And that's actually really where we're going to start. So let's take a look at our game real quick. And if you remember, we had it set up to where the paddles in the ball would move and do this sort of thing. But you'll notice one of the things that happens is when I click start, this ball is wherever I set it. Okay? And I don't really like that. We want it to be the same so that when you start the game the same, it is always in the right place. And one of the ways we can go about doing that is by using a feature called the go-to command. So if I put the go-to command in here, I can put in 0, 0. And that will tell it to always go to the center when I click on this thing. And it will move back to the center every time I click on it. But that doesn't look very pretty. So I'm going to introduce you to a prettier one, which is the glide command. And the glide command moves it slowly. So if I use the glide command, it slowly moves back to 0, 0 each time, okay? And I can do that also with the paddles as well. So as far as getting the paddles to go where I want, I can click on my sprite object down here, and I can also do a glide. And one of the things I can do is I can try and get my sprite arranged kind of where I want it first. And you'll notice there are some X and Y coordinates. And it looks like I want it at about negative 200 and 0. So you'll notice when I clicked on that, it's at about negative 200 and 0. So that's really where I want to go. And this whole screen is 240 from negative 240 to 240, and from negative 240 to positive 240. So we are going to glide this paddle to negative 200 and 0 because we want it to start in the middle between top and bottom. I'm going to do the opposite with this one. I'm going to glide it to 200 and 0. And certainly, as you'll notice, they have moved. Even if I hit the start the game and we move some of these around, the next time I stop and hit start, they will all move to the proper location. So that's exactly what we wanted to do. So object 1, getting the parts to start the same every game, completed. So one of the things we need to understand in Scratch is that each object can not only move up and down by using the XY, but it can also move forward, and that forward is really determined by its direction. So we need to understand, well, what does that really mean, direction? Well, if we look at this chart, you can see that it has some kind of degrees in here. And 0 degrees means it's pointing directly up, and it slowly moves over. You can go over to 90 degrees, which is left, and of course anything between 0 and 90 is moving kind of at this angle, depending on how large the number is. It will get bigger all the way up to 180, and actually this is also negative 180. I don't know why they don't say that. And then it gets smaller and smaller down to negative 90, and of course negative 80, negative 70, negative 60, so on until we get back to 0. So it kind of, depending on which way you're pointing, there will be a number that corresponds to it. So if it's between 0 and 90, you know it's pointing somewhere in this direction. And if it's negative 90, it's somewhere in this direction. Likewise, if it's pointing anywhere between these 2 points, it's pointing up. and if it's anywhere between these two, it's pointing down. And that will become very important. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get this thing, the ball, pointing in a 45, because right now it's pointing in a 90, and when it flips direction, it points to obviously negative 90, so it goes right, left, which is kind of boring for a Pong game. So we need to pick a different direction. I'm going to pick 45, which should be halfway between 0 and 90. It should be in this direction. And the way we can do that is we can use the direction, point in direction block. So after I move to the right spot, I'm actually going to point it in the right direction. And if you remember, 90 is right. I want to be in between right and up, so that is 45. 90 minus 0 divided by 2 is 45, and that will point me in a direction that moves at an angle. And you'll notice that's exactly what it does. Great, but what if I want to know where it's pointing right now? It's not really pointing at 45, so we can actually add something in to track that. And what I'm going to add in to track that is something called a variable. And I'm going to make a variable called angle. What angle is it moving at? And I'm going to make it for the ball only at this point. So you'll notice I now have a value called angle, and it's there. And I want to know where it is at all times. So I don't want to just do it once. It obviously changes direction. So I want to set my angle here to my direction. Now this little direction bubble is a value. It will tell me the direction of the object. So every time it goes through here, I want it to check what the angle is and set it to the direction of the ball. And if I do that, you'll notice it's now at 45, and then it changes direction as it bounces around the game. So that's fine and all. We now have it moving a little bit more complex, but one thing you'll notice is if I put my paddles here, it will repeat forever. The ball that is moving up will bounce back down, and this could be a very boring Pong game. In a true Pong game, this ball would actually bounce up. And so we actually need to have a little bit better understanding of the direction. So we need to be able to detect if the ball is going up or down. So if you remember this diagram that goes through here, and we can kind of figure out what up is. If it is smaller than negative 90, or greater than negative 90, excuse me, meaning it's more towards the 0, or if it's less than 90, it's going up. So we can actually do something a little different there. We can use what's called a comparison. And we want to do detect if it's going up. And of course, if it's not going up, then it is also going down. So I'm going to use this thing called an if then else. If it meets certain conditions, it's going to be going up. Otherwise, it's going to be going down. And I'm going to bring this out for a minute. And I'm going to put my values in there. So if it meets some certain conditions, the first thing I want to say is that it's going up. And if not, I want it to be going down. So I want to detect if the ball is going up or down. But what are those conditions? Well, we need to add some operators. We know it has to be between negative 90 and 0, so it has to be greater than negative 90. And we also know that it has to be less than 90, because if it's greater than 90, it's in the down region. So we have two conditions, greater than negative 90 and less than 90. And you'll notice if we go to our operators, there's some things here. There's some math, there's some comparisons, which we are doing if the direction is less than or if the direction is greater than. And then there's these other ones. These are some statements that tell us multiple conditions must be met. And certainly we have two conditions right now, greater than negative 90, less than 90. So we need the and. If it was one or the other, we could use or if we didn't want that condition, we could use the not. But we have two conditions which must be met, so we use the and block. And the first thing we said is we want to know if the direction is greater than negative 90. So we can get our greater than block here and put it in there. And remember, we can get the direction simply by going to motion, finding the direction, and saying, is it greater than negative 90? If it is, then it's moving up. But what is the other condition? Well, the other condition was that it had to be less than 90. So we need to use our less than symbol. We need to go back and get our direction because we need to know if the direction is less than 90. And if we put in less than 90, it should tell us this whole time whether it is going up, and you can see it is. Now it's moving down, now it's moving up, down, up, and you get this information. So we used some operators to detect if the direction was greater than -90 and less than 90. And what we did is we told it to write that information to the angle. If it meets these criteria, we are moving up, so set our variable to up. Otherwise, we can set our variable to down. Great, so how does that help us? Well, now we can look at how it interacts when it bounces. So before we had if it was touching the sprite to turn 180 degrees. Now we want to make that determination based on whether it's going up or down. So let's take sprite 1 here, and let's remove this 180 degrees. And sprite 1 is this one here. So if it's going up, if the ball is moving like so, we want it to turn and go that way, which is a left turn. If the ball is moving this way and the front is up here, the left is here, the right is here. So we want it to go left if it's moving up. Otherwise, we want it to go right if it's moving down. And if that sounds like an if then else, if it's going one direction, then turn left, otherwise turn right. That's because it is. So we can use one more operator here because we want to detect if something is equal. Is the direction going up? Well, we know we have the equals, we know one end is up, and we've already set the variable to tell us whether it's going up or down. So all we need to do is use that variable. If it's going up, we need to turn to the left 90 degrees. Otherwise, we need to turn right 90 degrees because we know we're going down. So if we're moving up, turn left, otherwise turn right. And when we play this game, now you'll notice it's going to bounce around here. It's moving up, and it bounces up now, which makes for a much more complex and interesting game. Now why it did that is because I probably have my stuff not centered, but see, you can see it moves down. We could repeat the same thing for the opposite side. So again, get rid of our touching 180, add in our commands, if, then, else, but we need to think a little bit differently about this one. In this case, if it's going up, it bounces to the right and not the left. In this case, it bounces to the left. In this case, if it's moving up, it turns to the right. So we can again use our operator. We can again grab our value that we had created up here. If the angle is up, then we need to turn to the right this time. So let's turn to the right 90 degrees, and else turn left 90 degrees. And certainly, we should now get a proper bounce. Oops. I need to work on centering my stuff, but you can see it should bounce up, and it does. And if I let this go for a minute, it'll give it to me where it'll bounce down. So there we go, and it bounces down. So great, that pretty much sums it up. So the first thing we did is we used our value of direction, which tells us which way the ball is facing, to figure out whether it's moving up or down. We then created a variable, and that's just something that stores a value for us. And we set that value to up if it was indeed meeting these conditions to point up, and if not, pointing down. And then we use this to detect which way it should bounce when it runs into the sprites. And that gives us a more complex Pong game. Stay tuned. Next lesson, we will be adding scores. We will be making other conditions to make the game a bit more difficult. One more thing before I go. I forgot to mention that we also need to save our work. So the easy way to do that, file, download to your computer. It will ask you where to save it, and you can save it anywhere you would like. Okay? So that's how we get through to that. And yeah, I will see you next time.